Okay, so this is the third topic of the political, poly, and international law. So we now go to the legislative department. Ayan, ikatlo. Legislative department. Letter A, legislative power is the authority to make laws, to alter or repeal them. Ayan, so siguro kung mas magandang sagot doon, under the Constitution, the legislative power is vested in the Congress. They have the authority to make, alter, or repeal laws. So Section 1, Article 6 of the Philippine Constitution, sabi niya, the legislative power shall be vested in the Congress of the Philippines, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives, except to the extent reserved to the people by the provision on initiative and referendum. Congress cannot pass irrepealable laws since Congress powers are plenary and limited only by the Constitution. Any attempt to limit the powers of future Congresses via an irrepealable law is not allowed. Yan. So, ibig sabihin ng plenary is absolute. Absolute ang powers ng Congress. Ang naglilimit lang sa kanya ay ang Constitution. So, tignan din natin yung limitations ng legislative power. Dalawa yan, substantive and procedural. Sa substantive, ito yung limitations on the content of laws. May limitasyon kasi under the Constitution, no law shall be passed establishing a state religion. Yan. So, yun ang limitasyon niya. Tama nga na Constitution lang ang naglilimit sa kanya. And sa procedural limitations. Limitations on the manner of passing laws. Bills must go through 3 readings on 3 separate days. So both the substantive and procedural limitations of the legislative power comes from the Constitution. Principle of non-delegability. Congress, as a general rule, cannot delegate its legislative power. Since the people have already delegated legislative power to Congress, the latter cannot delegate any further. So exceptions ay dalawa. The delegation of legislative power to the local government units and the instances when the Constitution itself allows for such delegation. Ito yung delegation naman sa mga administrative agencies. Congress can only delegate usually to administrative agencies yung rule-making power or law execution. Ito yung nabanggit natin sa unang reading natin, filling up the details of an otherwise complete statute or ascertaining the facts necessary to bring a contingent law or provision into actual operation. Kasi yung administrative agencies, under yan ng executive branch, sila yung nagpapatupad ng batas. So, letter B, talakayin natin yung House of Congress, compositions and qualifications. So, dito sa binabasa natin, meron lang siningit. Sabi niya rito, no senator shall serve for more than 2 consecutive terms. Okay, so Senate. 24 senators who shall be elected at large by the qualified voters of the Philippines as may be provided by law. So, ang qualifications, number 1, natural-born citizen. Number 2, at least 35 years old on the day of election. Number 3, able to read and write. Number 4, a registered voter. And number 5, a Philippine resident for at least 2 years immediately preceding the day of the election. Habang binabasa ko ito, ako ay 20 years old. So, malayo pa na pwedeng maging senador ako. Term of office, 6 years commencing at noon, June 30 next following their election. So, ang term nila, 6 years. It shall commence at noon of June 30 next following their election, unless otherwise provided by law. Term limitations. No senator shall serve for more than 2 consecutive terms. A voluntary renunciation of office for any length of time shall not be considered as an interruption in the continuity of his service for the full term for which he was elected. The qualifications for both senators and members of the House are limited to those provided by the Philippine Constitution. Congress cannot, by law, add or subtract from these qualifications. House of Representatives. Ayan. House of Representatives shall be composed of 250 members. Ito yung mga elected ng kanilang distrito. Not more than 50 party list representative. Ito yung 20% of the total number of representatives. So, it shall be composed of 250 members. Ang 50 roon, 50 ay shall come from the party list representatives. Okay, so yung mga district representatives, ito yung mga alam natin talagang congressman, yeah? They shall be elected from their respective legislative districts, yan, apportioned among the provinces, cities, and the metropolitan Manila area. Legislative districts are apportioned in accordance with the number of inhabitants of each area and on the basis of a uniform and progressive ratio. So each district shall comprise, as far as practicable, contiguous, compact, and adjacent territory. Each city with at least 250,000 inhabitants will be entitled to at least one representative. Each province will have at least one representative. Legislative districts shall be reapportioned within 3 years after the return of each census. Pero the judiciary cannot compel the Congress to do this, yung reapportionment. The standards used to determine the apportionment of legislative districts is meant to prevent gerrymandering. Ayan, pinipigilan ng gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is the formation of a legislative district out of separate territories so as to favor a particular candidate or party. So ano naman ang qualifications ng mga district representatives ng mga congressmen natin? Number 1, natural-born citizen of the Philippines. Number 2, at least 25 years old on the day of the election. Number 3, able to read and write. Number 4, registered voter in the district he seeks to represent. Number 5, a resident of such district for at least 1 year immediately preceding the day of election. Term of office nila, number 1, each member of the House shall be elected for a term of 3 years, which shall commence at noon on June 30 next following their election. So may pagkakaparehas sila ng senador. Shall commence. Yun nga lang, ang term nila ay 3 years lang, which shall commence at noon on June 30 next following their election. Voluntary renunciation of office for any length of time shall not be considered as an interruption in the continuity of his service for the full term for which he was elected. Term limitations, no member of the House of Representatives shall serve for more than 3 consecutive terms. 3 consecutive terms. Ano naman yung mga party list representatives? Ito, mga congressmen din to, bahagi sila ng lower house. Yeah. Constitute 20% of the total number of representatives including those under the party list system. So, mechanics ganito. Number 1, registered organizations shall submit a list of candidates in order of priority. Number 2, during the elections, these organizations are voted at large. National ang pagboto sa kanila. Binoboto mo yung party list nila. And number 3, the number of seats that each organization gets out of the 20% allotted to the system depends on the number of votes they get. Paramihan ng boto. Qualifications, number 1, natural-born citizen of the Philippines. Number 2, at least 25 years of age on the day of the election. And number 3, able to read and write. Yun. Tapos, Section 9 ng Article 6 ba ito? Teka, nalito ako sa binabasa ko. Yan, of the Philippine Constitution, sabi niya, in case of vacancy in the Senate or in the House of Representatives, a special election may be called for to fill. Ayan, pangit na sumulat ito. Ulitin natin. In case of vacancy in the Senate or in the House of Representatives, a special election may be called to fill such vacancy in the manner prescribed by law, but the senator or member of the House of Representatives thus elected shall serve only for the unexpired term. Ano nga ba ang kaibahan ng term at tenure? Term means the period during which the elected officer is legally. Yan means the period during which the elected officer is legally authorized to assume his office and exercise the powers thereof. Yung term cannot be reduced. Tenure is the actual period during which such officer is ulitin natin, is the actual period during which such officer actually holds his position. So kapag nag-resign siya na hindi niya pa natapos yung term niya, yun yung tenure. Tenure may be limited, thus a provision which considers an elective officer automatically vacated when the holder thereof files a certificate of candidacy for another elective office is valid, as it only affects the officer's tenure and not the term, except for the President and Vice President. Kasi di ba may mga posisyon na kapag nag-file ka na ng COC mo, Certificate of Candidacy, automatic nababakate mo na yung office. So, doon nagtatapos ang iyong tenure nang hindi mo pa natatapos yung term of office. So, yun ang kaibahan nila. Letter C, legislative privileges, inhibitions, and qualifications. Legislative privileges, inhibitions, and qualifications. immunity from arrest. So legislators are privileged from arrest while Congress is in session with respect to offenses punishable by up to 6 years of imprisonment. Thus, when the Congress is in regular or special session, the immunity from arrest applies. Yan. If the Congress is in recess, members thereof may be arrested. Immunity is not only with respect to arrests and not to prosecution for criminal offenses. So, immunity nila from arrest lang. Pero kung may kaso sila, may ginawa silang paglabag sa batas, they can be prosecuted. Immune lang sila from arrest while the Congress is in session. Legislative privilege naman. Mga privileges nila yan. No member shall be questioned or held liable in any forum other than his or her respective congressional body for any debate or speech in the Congress or in any committee thereof. Ang limitations ng legislative privilege. Number 1, the protection is only against forum other than the Congress itself. Only against forum other than the Congress itself. Kung kaya't inflammatory remarks may be sanctioned. Number 2, the speech or debate must be made in performance of their duties as members of Congress. And number 3, Congress need not be in session when the utterance is made as long as it forms part of legislative action. Yun ang limitations ng legislative privilege. So, tingnan muna natin yung disqualification when applicable. So, etong mga members of the legislature, tama ba? They cannot hold any other office or employment in the government. Pero applicable lamang yun during his term. If he does so, he forfeits his seat. So, kunwari, elected senator ka, tapos in-appoint ka, pumayag ka na umupo ka as DILG secretary, you forfeit your seat. Yan ang sinasabi rito. Cannot be appointed to any office. So, if the office is created or the emoluments increased during his term. Conflict of interest yun eh. So, cannot be appointed to any office kapag, applicable siya kapag ang office is created or the emoluments increase during his term. Cannot personally appear as counsel before any court or tribunal during his term of office. So, pagka natapos niya na yung term niya at abogado siya, kunwari, pwede siyang mag-appear ulit as counsel, pero not during the term of his office. Hindi sila pwede or cannot be financially interested in any contract, franchise, or special privilege granted by the government during his term of office. Cannot intervene in any matter before any office of the government when it is for his pecuniary benefit or where he may be called upon to act on account of his office. So, yun. Di sila pwedeng tumanggap ng any office or employment in the government. Sabagay, double compensation naman yan, no? Section 15 ng Article 6 pa rin to tungkol sa legislative body natin. Regular sessions. Yan. Congress convenes once every year on the 4th Monday of July unless otherwise provided by law. Continues in session for as long as it sees fit until 30 days before the opening of the next regular session excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and legal holidays. So yun ang kanilang regular sessions. Special sessions is called by the President at any time when Congress is not in session. Yan. So meron ding mga itinalaga sa konstitusyon na officers ng ating legislative body. So sa Senate, kailangan daw magtalaga ng Senate President. Sa Congress naman, Speaker of the House. Each house may choose such other officers as it may deem necessary. Kung kahit pag nanood tayo ng TV, mayroong mga minority leader, minority chorba, kasi each house can choose such other officers as it may deem necessary. So, paano naman ine-elect yung officers nila? By a majority vote of all respective members. Majority vote. So, kung officers ng Senado, 24 sila doon, majority vote ng lahat ng membro ng Senado. Pag naman sa Congress, majority vote ng lahat ng miyembro ng Congress. Yun. Okay, letter D, quorum and voting majority. So, number 1, majority of each house shall constitute a quorum. Number 2, a smaller number may adjourn from day to day and may compel attendance of absent members. Number 3, in computing a quorum, members who are outside the country and thus outside of each house's coercive jurisdiction are not included. Okay. internal rules nila, each house shall determine its own procedural rules. Number 2, the courts cannot intervene in the implementation of such rules as they affect the members of Congress. And number 3, since Congress has the power to make these rules, it also has the power to ignore them when circumstances so require. So kung isa kang congressman kunwari, nag-visit ka sa rules ninyo, hindi ka pwedeng mag-file ng mandamus, for example, sa korte to compel them na sundin yung inaakala mong rules na gusto mo. Letter E, discipline of members by suspension and expulsion. So, suspension by concurrence of 2/3 of all its members and shall not exceed 60 days. Pag expulsion naman by concurrence of 2/3 of all its members. So, in reality pala, pwedeng ma-expel ang isang mambabatas, lalo na kung terrorism ang pinopromote niya o anti-government ang pinopromote niya. Letter F, process of lawmaking. Bills that must originate from the House of Representatives. Ito yung galing dapat sa House of Representatives. Number 1, appropriation bills. Number 2, revenue bills. Number 3, tariff bills. Number 4, bills authorizing the increase of public debt. Number 5, bills of local application. And number 6, private bills. The Senate may, however, propose or concur with amendments. So ano ba ang appropriation bills? The primary and specific aim is to appropriate a sum of money for the public treasury. Appropriation bills, ito yung bill. A bill enacting the budget is an appropriation bill. A bill creating a new office and appropriating funds thereof is not. So yung kaibahan nila. A bill enacting the budget is an appropriations bill. Pero pag nag-create ka ng office, pinunduhan mo yon, hindi yon matatawag na appropriation bill. Revenue bill is one specifically designed to raise money or revenue through imposition or levy. Thus, a bill introducing a new tax is a revenue bill, but a provision in, for instance, the Videogram Regulatory Board law imposing a tax on video rentals does not make the law a revenue bill. Bills of local application. A bill of local application such as asking for the concession of a municipality into, a bill of local application such as asking for the conversion of a municipality into a city is deemed to have originated from the House, provided that the bill of the House was filed prior to the filing of the bill in the Senate, even if in the end the Senate approved its own version. So, bills of local application, sabi nga, dapat nag-originate sa House of Representatives. So, ulitin natin, bills of local application. A bill of local application such as asking for the conversion of a municipality into a city is deemed to have originated from the House, provided that the bill of the House was filed prior to the filing of the bill in Senate, even if in the end the Senate approved its own version. So, ito, pagtsikahan natin how a bill becomes a law. Mahaba-haba ito. Meron siyang, ilan ba ito? 12, pero mahaba ito. Number 1, preparation of the bill. The member or bill drafting division of the Reference and Research Bureau prepares and drafts the bill upon the member's request. Ikalawang procedure, first reading. Sa first reading, the bill is filed with the Bills and Index Service and the same is numbered and reproduced. 3 days after its filing, the same is included in the order of business for the first reading. On first reading, the Secretary General reads the title and number of the bill. The Speaker refers the bill to the appropriate committee. So, yun ang nangyayari sa first reading. Susunod na mangyayari ay yung committee consideration or action. Ang mangyayari doon, they will evaluate the necessity of conducting public hearings. So, if necessary, it schedules the time thereof, issues public notice from the experts in public and private sector. Susunod, committee discussions. Susunod, the committee approves the committee report and formally transmits the same to the Plenary Affairs Bureau. So ito yung napapanood natin minsan sa TV na iniimbitahan yung mga resource person, iniimbitahan yung mga experts. Yan. Ito, ika-4 na stage is the second reading. So, sa second reading, the committee report is registered and numbered by the Bills and Index Service. It is included in the order of business and referred to the committee or rules. Committee on Rules schedules the bill for consideration on second reading. On second reading, the Secretary General reads the number, title, and text of the bill, and the following takes place: period of sponsorship and debate, period of amendments, voting which may be by viva voce, count by fellers, division of the House, and nominal voting. Sa third reading naman, ito yung ikalimang proseso. Sa third reading, the amendments, if any, are engrossed and printed copies of the bill are reproduced for third reading. The engrossed bill is included in the calendar of bills for third reading, and copies of the same are distributed to all members 3 days before its third reading. On third reading, the Secretary General reads only the number and title of the bill. A roll call or nominal voting is called, and a member, if he desires, is given 3 minutes to explain his vote. No amendment on the bill is allowed at this stage. So, ang mangyayari dito, dalawa lang. If the bill is approved. So, the bill is approved by an affirmative vote of a majority of the members present. Pag naman is disapproved, if the bill is disapproved, the same is transmitted to the archives. O kunwari, na-aprobahan naman yung bill. Punta na tayo sa number 6, transmittal of the approved bill to the Senate. O, kailangan kasi ng concurrence ng Senate. Susunod, Senate action on approved bill of the House. So the bill undergoes the same legislative process in the Senate. Bubusisiin nila yan. Chorva-chorva. Ngayon, pag may pagkakaiba doon sa kanilang pagbubusisi, may gustong isingit ang Senate, magkakaroon ngayon ng Conference Committee. So, Conference Committee is constituted and is composed of members from each house to settle, reconcile, or thresh out differences or disagreements on any provision of the bill. The conferees are not limited to reconciling the differences in the bill but may introduce new provisions germane to the subject matter or may report out an entirely new bill on the subject. The Conference Committee prepares a report to be signed by all the conferees and the chairman. The Conference Committee report is submitted for consideration or approval of both houses. No amendment is allowed kapag na-submit na yung Conference Committee report para sa consideration or approval ng both houses. Susunod, number 9, transmittal of the bill to the President. So, copies signed by the Senate President and Speaker shall be transmitted to the President. So, presidential action on the bill. Dalawa lang yung pwede niyang gawin. I-veto niya, i-send back niya to the House of Origin, or i-approve niya. Pag na-approve niya, mag-a-assign na ng RA number or Republic Act number. So, kunwari, inaprubahan niya. Ito yung number 11th stage, yung action on approved bill. Copies are reproduced and sent to the official gazette for publication and to the implementing agencies. E paano naman kung vinito niya yung bill? So ganito naman ang mangyayari, action on vetoed bill. The message is included in the order of business. If the Congress decides to override the veto, the House and Senate shall proceed separately to reconsider the bill or the vetoed items of the bill. So 2/3 vote of members of each House. Pagka bumoto ang 2/3 vote of members of each House, such bills or items becomes a law. Kahit pa vinito yan ng Presidente. So, yon ang istorya natin. How a bill becomes a law. So, punta tayo sa letter H. Legislative inquiries and oversight functions. So, legislative inquiries, number 1, either a house or any of their committees may conduct inquiries in aid of legislation. Number 2, in aid of legislation does not mean that there is pending legislation regarding the subject of the inquiry. In fact, investigation may be needed for purposes of proposing future legislation. Number 3, if the stated purpose of the investigation is to determine the existence of violations of the law, the investigation is no longer in aid of legislation, but in aid of prosecution. This violates the principle of separation of powers and is beyond the scope of congressional powers. So, ang tama lang sa mga legislative inquiries ay in aid of legislation. Pero kung in aid of prosecution na yan, kagaya nung may gustong idikdik yung Congress, politically motivated, vina-violate na nila yung principle of separation of powers and is beyond the scope of congressional powers. So yun ang legislative inquiry. Ano naman ang oversight functions? So the power to review the executive budget and the power of appropriation implies this core function of the Congress. Legislative oversight is also viewed as legislative supervision and monitoring of the executive, whether overt or covert. It is a constraint or limitation placed upon the executive branch of the government that prevents executive action from making policy unilaterally. Yeah. Principle of checks and balance. So, legislative inquiries and oversight functions, ito yun, ipaliwanag na natin. Legislative inquiries and oversight functions. Letter I, power of impeachment. Article 9, Section 2, the President, the Vice President, member of the Supreme Court, the members of the Constitutional Commissions, and the Ombudsman may be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of culpable violation of the Constitution, treason, bribery, graft and corruption, other high crimes, betrayal of public trust. So yun yung dahilan. So para maalisin mo ang Presidente, VP, members of the Supreme Court, at yung membro ng Constitutional Commissions, at yung Ombudsman, impeachment proceedings. Ang grounds mo, ayan, for impeachment for and conviction of, yan, yung mga nabanggit natin, culpable violation of the Constitution, treason, bribery, graft and corruption, other high crimes, betrayal of public trust. So Article 9, Section 3, the House of Representatives shall have the exclusive power to initiate the cases of impeachment. So mangyayari dyan, complaint filed by any member of the House, ang mangyayari at least one-third. Pag nakuha mo yung at least one-third vote of all the members of the House, magiging verified complaint with articles of impeachment. Ang mangyayari, pupunta siya, Senate will act as impeachment court and has the sole power to try and decide cases of impeachment. Susunod na mangyayari, judgment only covers removal. So, ang judgment nito ay para lang tanggalin siya. So, pag natanggal siya, pwede pa rin siyang i-prosecute. And then, Congress shall promulgate its rules. So, no impeachment proceedings shall be initiated against the same official more than once within 1 year. Yan. So, magpunta naman tayo. Letter J, Electoral Tribunals and Commission on Appointments. Okay, the Electoral Tribunal. The Senate and the House shall each have an electoral tribunal which shall be composed of, number 1, 3 Supreme Court justices to be designated by the Chief Justice and, ikalawa, 6 or 6 members of the Senate or House as the case may be. So merong Senate Electoral Tribunal, meron ding House of Representatives Electoral Tribunal. Itong 6 members of the Senate or House, as the case may be, shall be chosen on the basis of proportional representation from the political parties and party list organizations. Ano ang jurisdiction nitong mga ito? Each electoral tribunal shall be the sole judge relating to the election returns and qualifications of their respective members. This includes the validity or invalidity of a proclamation declaring a particular candidate as the winner. So, election contest is one where a defeated candidate challenges the qualification and claims for himself the seat of a proclaimed winner. Yan, election contest. In the absence of an election contest, the electoral tribunal is without jurisdiction. So, may jurisdiction lang sila pag may election contest relating to, ayan, sinabanggit natin kanina, to the election, returns, and qualifications of their respective members. However, the power of each house to expel its own members or even to defer them from taking their oath until their qualifications are determined may still be exercised even without an election contest. So, yon ang mga electoral tribunals. Ano naman ang Commission on Appointments? Ano naman ito? Shall be constituted within 30 days after the Senate and the House of Representatives shall have been organized with the election of the President and Speaker. Ayan, the Senate President with the election of the Senate President and the Speaker of the House. So, pag na-organize mo na, within 30 days, after ma-organize ang Senate and House of Representatives, within 30 days, matapos mong i-organize yon, dapat i-constitute na nila ang Commission on Appointments. Okay, ano pa ba? Saan na ba tayo? Pero bago natin pag-usapan yung Commission on Appointments, mamaya, pumunta muna ulit tayo sa electoral tribunals. Ayan. Kasi ang electoral tribunals are independent constitutional bodies. So neither Congress nor the courts may interfere with procedural matters relating to the function of the electoral tribunals, such as their setting of deadlines or filing their election contests with the respective electoral tribunals. Its members may not be arbitrarily removed from their positions in the tribunal by the parties which they represent. Neither may they be removed from not voting according to party lines, since they are acting independently of Congress. The mere fact that the members of either the Senate or the House sitting on the electoral tribunal are those which are sought to be disqualified due to the filing of an election contest against them does not warrant all of them from being disqualified from sitting in the electoral tribunal. Judicial review of decisions of the electoral tribunals may be held with the Supreme Court only insofar as a decision or resolution was rendered without or in excess of jurisdiction or with grave abuse of discretion constituting denial of due process. So kung kumbaga yung aangal ka dun sa desisyon ng electoral tribunal, kung merong ground naman na ang electoral tribunal rendered the decision without or in excess of jurisdiction or with grave abuse of discretion constituting denial of due process, ang magiging linya mo patungong Supreme Court ay through judicial review. Okay, magtungo naman tayo sa, once again, Commission on Appointments. So, Commission on Appointments meets only while Congress is in session. Yan. They shall be composed of, number 1, the Senate President as ex officio chairman, number 2, 12 senators, and number 3, 12 members of the House. The 12 senators and 12 representatives are elected on the basis of proportional representation from the political parties and party list organizations. Ano ang jurisdiction nila? The Commission on Appointments shall confirm the appointments by the President with respect to the following positions. Ito, heads of the executive departments except, except with, nakalimutan ko na, hindi ko mabasa eh. So, heads of executive departments except if VP is appointed. Ayun, pagka ang Vice President ay inappoint na maging head, kunwari si Sara Duterte, inappoint ni Bongbong Marcos na maging DepEd Secretary, hindi na kailangan dumaan sa Commission on Appointments. Ambassadors and other public ministers or consuls, officers of the Armed Forces of the Philippines from the rank of Colonel or Naval Captain, and other officers whose appointments are vested in him by the Constitution. Ibig sabihin, vested in the President by the Constitution. Katulad ng COMELEC members. So, yung kagaya ko po na shaman of love, yan, hindi ko kailangan dumaan sa Commission on Appointments. Hindi ko rin kailangan dumaan sa appointment ng President kasi ako ay independent of the Constitution. Yan. Congress cannot by law prescribe the appointment of a person to an office created by such law shall be subject to confirmation by the Commission on Appointments. So, hindi pwedeng gumawa ng batas ang Congress na yung appointment of a person to an office shall be subject to confirmation by the CA kung hindi naman siya subject to the confirmation of the CA. Appointments extended by the President to the above-mentioned positions while Congress is not in session shall only be effective until disapproval by the Commission on Appointments or until the next adjournment of Congress. So kapag hindi in session, nag-appoint si President, magiging effective siya hanggang sa i-disapprove ito ng Commission on Appointments or until the next adjournment of Congress. Magtungo naman tayo sa letter K, initiative and referendum. So, amendments of the Constitution may likewise be directly proposed by the people through initiative upon a petition of at least 12% of the total number of registered voters, of which every legislative district must be represented by at least 3% of the registered voters therein. So, kailangan at least 12% ng lahat ng registered voters sa Pilipinas at sa 12% na yon, bawat legislative district ay nare-represent sila at least 3% of those of the legislative districts sa buong Pilipinas. Yan. So, ang initiative and referendum, ayan. A referendum or initiative affecting a law, resolution, or ordinance is deemed validly initiated by at least 10%. So, kapag naman ang mag-i-initiative and referendum ka na batas, resolution, or ordinance, it is deemed validly initiated by at least 10% naman of the registered voters in the province or city, of which every legislative district must be represented by at least 3% of the registered votes therein. So either national law, ang pinag-usapan natin ito, sa ordinances, yan, resolutions sa autonomous regions, 3% of the registered voters of yun na nga, either the country kung national law, 3% of the registered voters kung province of, o ng buong province o municipality naman, kung ordinansa ang pinag-uusapan, as the case may be, or 3%, at least 3% of the registered voters of the barangay, as the case may be. Tama ba? Baka nagkamali ako dito. Pero basahin na lang natin siya ulit. Pag amendment sa Constitution ang pinag-uusapan, it may be directly proposed by the people through initiative upon a petition of at least 12% of the total number of registered voters, of which every legislative district must be represented by at least 3% of the registered voters therein. So, a referendum or initiative naman affecting a law, kanina Constitution, ngayon law, resolution, or ordinance is deemed validly initiated by at least 10% of the registered voters, In the province, kung provincial ordinance, city, 10 percentum, of which every legislative district must be represented by at least 3 percentum of the registered voters therein. So, ang initiative and referendum must be registered. So, it should be a verified petition. Verified petition, i-register mo siya to the Commission on Elections. Tapos, the Commission on Elections shall set a special registration day at least 3 weeks before a scheduled initiative or referendum. Alam ko meron pa akong babasahin to ko sa initiative or referendum ng mga barangay. Pero ang alam ko, kunwari, nakakalito ito, pag national law, at least 10% ng registered voters sa buong Pilipinas, tapos 3% ng, at least 3% ng bawat legislative district yung nire-represent nila doon. So kung initiative or referendum naman kunwari ng municipal or city ordinance, alam ko at least 10% din ng at least 10% of the registered voters sa buong city. Tapos at least 3% ng bawat barangay ay nare-represent doon. So ganun siya. Indirect initiative. Any duly accredited people's organization as defined by law may file a petition for indirect initiative with the House of Representatives and the legislative bodies. So any duly accredited, so kailangan duly accredited people's organization as defined by law may file a petition for indirect initiative with the House of Representatives and other legislative bodies. The petition shall contain a summary of the chief purposes and contents of the bill that the organization proposes to be enacted into law by the legislature. So, yung mga registered, duly accredited people's organization, mga